and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Don't mess with Texas. That's what they say. But how about your ideas about Texas? Chances are they are due for a review. Last September, Texas lawmakers passed SB 8, the most extreme ban in the U.S. criminalizing abortion after just 6 weeks, with virtually no exceptions, and deputizing individuals and groups anywhere to sue. This March, Texans voted in the first primaries of the year amid an uproar over voting restrictions, attacks on migrants, and an unrelenting assault not only on pregnant people and those who help them, but on virtually everything having to do with trans rights. Red, Republican, Texas has certainly been a testing ground for backlash policies and politicians, and that could be what's happening right now. But could it also be a bellwether of a different sort? Our guests today say that their state could also be a predictor of how 21st century change happens when people organize differently. What do people who don't live there have to learn about Texas? What do they have wrong? And what do Texans see as the path for reclaiming their state? Joining us today are activists from intersecting movements in Texas. Aimee Arrambide is the director of AVOW, which focuses on abortion access, reproductive health care, rights, and justice. Isha Pandit is co-founder of the Center for Advancing Innovative Policy. She's a member of the Crunk Feminist Collective online and co-founder of South Asian Youth in Houston Unite. Emmett Schelling is the director of the Transgender Education Network of Texas, or TENT, an organization dedicated to gender diverse equality in Texas. We're also going to be hearing from Greg Kazar, a labor organizer, Working Families Party member, and all-out progressive who won the Democratic primary March 1st and stands to run to represent a district that runs all the way from Austin to San Antonio. A lot to talk about in what I know is going to be too little time. We are messing with people's minds on Texas, but let's start perhaps with what they need to know about where things stand. And Aimee, I'm going to start with you. What is front and center of your mind right now in terms of the threats that issues and people that you care about are facing there in Texas?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Essentially, abortion has been pretty much banned in Texas since September, so over 6 months for the majority of people seeking abortion care. And that's not okay. It's also not in line with what the majority of Texans support. Texans support access to abortion care, and that's just been the truth since before Roe v. Wade. Texans are having to travel out of state to access the care they need, or they're being forced to carry their pregnancies to term, and that's absolutely not okay.
And what about you, Emmett? What's front and center of your mind?
We are in the midst of a vicious attack on trans kids and their parents, their caregivers, essentially criminalizing them simply for getting care for their children with physicians who are actually educated to provide that kind of care, unlike our legislators. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with is an AG who issued an opinion that was based on zero merit, zero fact, a governor who took that opinion, issued a directive to DFPS, or Department of Family Protective Services, to ask CPS to investigate any trans kids that were thought to have gender affirming care. And at the end of the day, what it did is the same vigilante sort of reporting on your neighbor, really creating a climate that just is not indicative and is not genuine to actual Texas.
Isha, I'm going to ask you to kick off, your sense of what is Texas up against, and why should those of us outside the state care?
What Aimee and Emmett articulated beautifully is the criminalization of self-determination that's been happening in this state. Criminalization of many families, of people trying to control their own families. And so when you hear Texas politicians say that they are pro-family, you will know that what they're actually up to over here is actually criminalizing safety for many families in the state. Texas is only relatively recently dominated by far-right politics. They are terrible and brazen, but they have not been in power forever. Far-right politicians, they know that Texas is a battleground state. They are approaching Texas as though there is something to be won here. And so my sort of call to reconfiguration of like how we talk about Texas is that why aren't progressives approaching Texas as a place where there is something to be won, a place that is on the cusp of sort of political and demographic shift? And that is the reason why this is such a battleground state for many conservatives.
One point of frustration for me is when people are like, well, forget Texas, right? Like, who cares? And then you have the same progressives saying, trans lives matter. Texas has the second highest population of transgender people in this country. So if you say trans lives matter, then that includes the trans lives in the state. We're talking about people's freedom, their bodily autonomy, their decisions over their healthcare. What impacts an individual the most is health.
The question of abortion is similar in the sense that we're already on track to see, I think the Guttmacher Institute is predicting something like 26 states following the route of Texas. And just to underscore what's unique so far about the Texas model, Aimee, why we should be afraid?
Banning abortion at 6 weeks is completely unconstitutional. But the bounty hunter component of the bill, where they essentially deputize anyone to sue anyone for, quote, aiding and abetting abortion access, is just completely contrary to any sort of judicial prudence that is established. Not only is abortion care going to be completely banned in 26 states after June, but what if this starts happening? I mean, it's already started happening with trans kids in Texas, but it's going to spread to any sort of human right that anyone disagrees with. And we cannot set that precedent.
All right. So we're going to switch in a second to what is being done differently in Texas that we can learn from. And one of the things that's being done is you are speaking very explicitly about being pro-abortion.
Well, one of the things is we changed our name to AVOW. Our tagline is unapologetic abortion advocacy. And one of the reasons that is behind that is that the opposition uses the word abortion 4 times more than our side does. So in fact, they've been able to frame the narrative. They've been able to spread misinformation and lies. They've been able to enact laws based on false claims. And I think we have to change that dynamic. We have to take back the word abortion. And then second to that, like 1 in 4 people will have an abortion in their lifetime. That is so many people that you love and care about within your community. And we have to talk about how we support the choices they make and support the families they build or choose not to build. You know, this is about love. Abortion is about love for yourself. It's about love for the family you want to create maybe later, the family that you already have and are, complete with. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we can do right now to change the trajectory of abortion rights is to just unapologetically declare how pro-abortion we are.
I think it's 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant, right?
Correct.
Emmett, to you, what's distinct in your approach, if there's a comparable distinction to be drawn?
To really lead successfully, right, we need leaders that actually are reflective of the constituency, right, that they're leading, really understand, are tied directly to who the people are, and understanding that and combining that with their own expertise, education, knowledge, whatever that looks like. And I think that's what we're doing different in Texas, is that we're unapologetically stepping out and we're saying, no, this may have been who you said we are. This may have been what you said we were about, but like, we're here to like clear the air and like let you know straight from us, this is who we are. This is what we look like. And this is what we are about.
Well, Greg Casar ran on a fairly unapologetically progressive and pro-labor platform this spring and won the Democratic primary March 1st. I had a chance to catch up with him and talk with him about how he is now going to run for Congress. Here's Greg.
When some people think of Texas, they think of the Bushes or Greg Abbott or Dan Patrick, but I think of Barbara Jordan. I think of Ann Richards. I think of Emmet Denayuka and the Pecan Shellers Union that built some of the most radical and progressive unions of women of color in our nation's history. That was here in Texas. While lots of folks think about Texas as the voter suppression law or our anti-abortion laws that have basically banned abortion in Texas. And that is all real and true. At the same time, Texas is the home of Roe v. Wade. This is where Roe v. Wade was won. This is also the home of, I think, the most flourishing and strong immigrants' rights movement in our country. And so I think that we need to sort of lean into and build up and support that fight back, because in so many ways, my race for Congress was a piece of that. It wasn't just me that won. It was that people wanted to go and vote for $15 an hour instead of a tax on workers' rights. They wanted to vote not only against the abortion ban in our state, but for making Roe v. Wade the law of the land and repealing the Hyde Amendment. People overwhelmingly believe in that kind of change. And so that's why Texas, to me, isn't a red state. It's an under-organized state, and it's time for us to invest in that kind of organizing. We're amongst the lowest states in the country for voter turnout. If we got more communities of color and working class folks to recognize that this system that has failed them could work if we all jointly participate, that's what changes the state, because this isn't a state of overwhelmingly reactionary people. It's a state where overwhelmingly reactionary people have run the show for so long that most folks say, I just don't want to participate anymore. I think it's actually exactly in places like Texas where we have, frankly, the most at stake, and where if we change things here, it changes the country.
We're closing our shows this season by asking people what they think is at stake right here in this moment that fuels their decision to do the work that they do.
We are facing attacks on just people's ability to thrive and survive. We're in a moment, we're on the precipice of even greater war. It's a time of real tension. But it's in these very moments, I think, where movements need to step up and be built and be born, where we show the best in us to be able to turn the page, to be able to say, you know what, we're going to have elections that count, and that we're going to include more and more people in voting. In Texas, where we're saying there's so little we can do about the climate crisis, it's actually exactly where we need to create climate, renewable, green energy jobs to be able to save our economy for working people and save our future for our kids. It's right now that we can actually finally say abortion rights and voting rights and civil rights are for everyone, right when they're most under attack from a place like Texas. So I think it's kind of in that darkest moment where the light shines the most bright, and we have to own that light and embrace it, instead of saying, oh no, we can't get too close to that light because what if things get worse? And so this is really, I think, the moment to do that. And I think my election shows that Texas isn't a red state. It is a place where folks are sick and tired of that, and we have to bring people in, organize folks, and I really believe that our democracy is going to be able to work from us.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. We just heard from Greg Casar, the Democratic nominee for Congress in Texas's Congressional District 35 that runs all the way from Austin to San Antonio. He won the primary in March as a former Austin City Council member and labor organizing. We're also going to hear more from my guests. Aimee Arrambide is the director of AVOW, which focuses on abortion access. She co-wrote the Public Leadership Institute's Playbook for Abortion Rights and serves on the board of Equality Texas, as well as the Advisory Council of Repro Action. Isha Pandit is co-founder of the Center for Advancing Innovative Policy, where she works to change dominant narratives through transformative policy strategies. Emmett Schelling is a trans South Korean immigrant and adoptee, currently serving as the executive director of the Transgender Education Network of Texas, an organization dedicated to gender diverse equality in the state. You'll hear more from him too, and to see all of our guests in action, I invite you to go to our YouTube channel. We have a television show. You can see that on over 300 public television stations every week. So take your pick. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or get more information about where you can watch us on TV at lauraflanders.org. And while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter so we can stay in touch with you. Subscribers get the entire uncut conversation from every week's show and my latest commentaries. I call them the F word. This week's is on Ukraine and on the contrast between a voter-run society and a snitch-run one. Next, in response to Greg Casar's statement that Texas isn't a red state, just an under-organized one, I ask my guests to share how they are organizing differently. But first, here's Reappropriate by Charlotte Adigéry and Bolis Pupil from their new super synth sonic album, Tropical Dancer, courtesy of Soulwax Dewey Records.
Reappropriate your sexuality. Accept and celebrate your sensuality. The broken child in you set her free. Reclaim your womanhood by saying what you need. Reappropriate your sexuality. You've got the right to femininity. It's yours to give, it's yours to keep. Embrace your womanhood by saying what you need. Appropriate, reappropriate, reappropriate, reappropriate.
Coming to you, Isha, I mean, Greg's very clear there. He says, that Texas, he's famous for saying Texas isn't a red state, it's an under-organized state. Now, I don't know if you would agree with that, but it is being organized in different ways.
If you look around at the leadership of our movements here in Texas, ground up organizing, it is led by communities most impacted. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And that is part of the story that is not told about what's happening here. And instead, we get sort of national organizers saying, here's how we've done it in these other states. And, back to my point, Texas is a very unique political state. The way that we think about the complicated nature of New York or California, there's so many nuances that go into national conversations about the red parts of the state, the blue parts of the state, the purple parts of the state. Texas doesn't get that gracious interpretation of being a complicated state. It is painted with one brush, and then we're expected to use movement strategies that are based on that one particular lens of Texas, and they don't line up with the vibrant nature of organizing by impacted communities that's happening here. And I think that's the story. That's the story of what's happening in Texas, is the diverse resistance.
So, Aimee, what messages do you find resonating that perhaps the rest of us should pick up or learn from, or at least try out on our neighbors?
I think when you're talking about abortion, you start from a place of values. You explain why it's important for anyone who wants to access the healthcare they need to be able to do so in their community, to be able to do so without any obstacles that are legislatively dictated and not medically, reasonable. And you have to talk about why that's important to you. And then you can back it up with facts. The fact that one of the largest populations of people of reproductive health age are in Texas, and why banning access to one of the safest procedures is not okay. And I think you have to talk to them about what's happening in our legislature. And then you can talk to them about the facts. And generally what we've found is when we have conversations with people, leading with our values and backing up with facts, people are on our side.
And the trans situation, Emmett, I mean, this is personal for you, for your family. For a lot of people, the assaults have come so hot and heavy, whether it's school sports teams or bathrooms or now reassignment surgery. The trauma is lingering over entire communities, as far as I can see, not just in Texas. How are you dealing with that part of this? And what's your learning, your teaching for us?
To start off, right, it's not a reassignment, it's an alignment, right? For me, all of the medical care that I have sought and been so fortunate to get, right, it was alignment for me. It was bringing my body, my being, in line with my spirit, in line with my mind, in line of who I inherently and deeply, and only I know myself to this level. And so I think, just as Aimee said, there's some fundamental things that we're seeing, right, Isha, as well, right, that aren't necessarily trans specific or even abortion specific, but I think they're just fundamental human values, the dignity, the sort of humanity that binds us together. We want to be free. We want to be able to have decisions over our own health. We're not going to entertain that, like, I deserve to exist or not. Like, I think we're beyond that, right? And once we can figure that road out to get through those things that we already inherently know and we recognize in each other, just being in this world, being in community, being in space together, sharing the state, we'll get back to where we need to be. Because at the end of the day, the reason the people in the state fight so hard and deal with our colleagues who aren't here, feeling like a mixture of, I think, sorry for us and just like frustrated, just leave, is because we know this. We see it every single day in our lives, in the people that we see, if it's on the street or if it's in our community. And we know each of these people is worth fighting for. And we know right now, Texans are not getting a fair shake. They're being taken advantage of by our leadership, who is peddling in lies and deceit for the sake of sick political power at this point.
You alluded to it there, Emmett. But I'm reminded of sort of where we began, that all the mythology around don't mess with Texas, don't step on me, all of that. Isha, you touched on what seems to me as a very potentially rich theme for Texans who believe strongly in independence and liberty and freedom. When you talked about the criminalization of self-determination, if ever there was a Texan value, it seems like self-determination is one of them.
You're looking at three people who identify as Texans. And when you close your eyes before this call, if you closed your eyes and thought of who you think a Texan is, you wouldn't have pictured our faces necessarily, is my guess. And that is what makes me hopeful. The very thing that makes conservative politicians wake up in the middle of the night in terrors of demographic shift is the exact thing that gives me hope. But I do know that that demographics aren't political destiny, and that we have to organize and we have to understand that, that investment in those communities as civic actors, both as citizens and non-citizens alike, as civic actors, is the solution to kind of countering some of these stories that we hear about who Texans are.
Over the summer, a 12-year-old girl reached out to me because she wanted to have her own rally against SB 8. And she got her friends to come speak. And we had 10 speakers that were under the age of 18. And they talked so passionately and so articulately about why they should have the right to abortion care and all the other human rights that were being attacked. And I just was in awe of these young people who are not only just unapologetic in their beliefs, but they were unafraid to voice them to the establishment. And they were just amazing. And so to me, that's a success story, and that gives me hope for the future.
What we keep on coming back to about the beauty of Texas is the leadership we have, why we believe in what we're doing, and why we see this organizing working is because when we say, like, how do we be inclusive, but not how do we just be inclusive? How do we be welcoming? How do we learn from one another? That's what's making things exciting for me, despite right, so much.
Well, Isha, I would love you to kick off closing comments with the personal, really. I mean, what do you believe is at stake here in this moment that fuels you to do the work that you do? Why?
The thing that makes me feel most hopeful is the fact that when you ask younger organizers to talk to you about the issues they care about, they respond in intersectional ways. Like Aimee said, they don't see reproductive justice and trans liberation and racial justice as disconnected from each other. And that's the work of, a broadly intersectional feminist movement that has, in fact, shaped the way these conversations are happening for young people.
Aimee?
Ever since I started telling my abortion story, which I didn't tell for like the first 15 years after I had my abortions, despite the fact that I work in this movement, despite the fact that my dad was an abortion provider, like I didn't tell my story. But once I did, everyone would talk to me about it because they wanted to talk about it. And I feel like People will find commonality and shared values. And we just need to make room for that, because I think that's how you affect the change, when you have empathy flowing and people just like connecting on a human level. But there's not a lot of space for that in politics or, the legislature. And it's unfortunate.
Emmett, final word from you. What can people do? What would you recommend people do if they want to respond in a positive way to what they've seen and heard here today?
Really just support the organizations on the ground. I think this conversation has been a great example of what that looks like, to have leadership so deeply rooted and deeply invested and deeply visioned for what the landscape is, what the path ahead looks like, and what those obstacles are. And most importantly, what the support of our people look like through that journey.
All right, so don't give up on Texas. Learn from Texas. Have a more complete picture and work like crazy wherever it is that you live. That's what I'm hearing from you all today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think this, too, is a reflection of your commitment to working together, that you take the time from each of your individual struggles to spend some time together. Myth busting about Texas. I appreciate it. And for people that want to see the full uncut version of this conversation, we will post it at our website for those who subscribe to our podcast. Thank you all.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Authoritarianism. We talked about it last week in relation to Vladimir Putin and the attack on Ukraine. It's sometimes thought of as strongman rule, but it's not really that. Those strongmen in authoritarian regimes are propped up by a whole network of people who are willing to snitch on their neighbors. A network of spies. I've seen it up close in East Germany. And that's really what we're talking about in Texas and increasingly around the United States. Snitching, it doesn't seem to me, is much of an American value, especially not in Don't Mess With Us, Texas. So what else is going on? Well, voters, when asked, a majority of them in Texas support keeping abortion safe and legal. State court judges who are elected are opposing the governor's actions investigating the parents of trans kids. Voting is a hot issue. Republicans are working hard to suppress the vote. So that, I think, is what it comes down to. Voters versus snitchers. Which country do you want to live in? For more information on this week's guests, along with a suggested reading list and links to related episodes in our archives, go to patreon.com/The ALF Show, where you will be invited to become a Patreon partner. As a precious Patreon partner, say that lots of times on Radio Fast, you can get early access to the entire uncut conversation from each week's show, and this week's is a good one. Our Patreon partners support this free podcast with a contribution of whatever they can afford every month, and they keep this programming free on TV, on radio, and right here. So a big shout out of thanks to our Patreon partners and a warm invitation for you to join them. Will you become a new Patreon partner as William did this week? Join us at patreon.com/The ALF Show. And thank you, William. For other options on how to donate, go to our website, lauraflanders.org. For other options on how to donate, find more on our website, and keep in touch with us, go to lauraflanders.org. That's www.lauraflanders.org. This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, with Sabrina Artel, Jeremiah Cothran, Jeannie Hopper, Nat Needham, David Newman, Rory O'Connor, and Jeanette Hernandez. Major funding for this program is provided by the Novo, Park, Ellen Poss Family, Hisuku Wilson Foundations, the Schumann Media Center, Rising Fund at Tides, Kim Connor and Nick Groombridge, Jane Fonda, and listeners like you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for your ideas. Stay kind. Stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.